They betrayed your confidence, and at the time, it probably seemed as though they just left without facing any repercussions. However, life has a peculiar way of imparting lessons to those who never anticipated learning them. The first emotion that typically arises when someone betrays your trust is disbelief, not just pain, but confusion. This is because the person who betrayed you was once someone you trusted, someone you let into the private areas of your life, someone who was aware of your thoughts, your struggles, and the aspects of your heart that you rarely shared with others. However, that same individual made a decision that altered everything, making you wonder how someone who had previously been so close to you could treat your trust so carelessly. It frequently feels unjust in certain situations. The person who caused it seems to move on with their life as if nothing had really changed, while you bear the burden of the betrayed trust. They chuckle. They proceed. They behave as though the chapter has just ended. That is the most painful aspect because it makes you worry if they will ever fully comprehend what they did and the extent of the trust they violated. However, many people don't realize this until much later. The most significant lessons in life are rarely imparted right away. It waits sometimes. It waits until the cacophony of diversion subsides, until memories start to resurface, and until the person who previously disregarded your worth finds themselves in a situation where it is hard to deny the reality. When that time comes, the lesson life teaches them is frequently quite different from what they anticipated because the individual who betrayed your confidence might have thought they had moved on from the narrative. However, they were unaware that life was subtly preparing them for a lesson they would eventually have to deal with. 1. The lesson's opening silence. Life doesn't start teaching kids the first lesson in a dramatic way. Your silence is the first step. When someone betrays your confidence, they typically want something in return. A disagreement, an altercation, or a message inquiring as to the reasons for their actions. When someone hurts someone who genuinely cares about them, they frequently think that person will remain connected to them through pain, fury, or an explanation, thus they expect emotion. However, occasionally something quite different occurs. You take a gradual step back rather than pursuing answers. Not because it wasn't painful to be betrayed. In actuality, it most likely caused more pain than they will ever realize. You trusted them, so it hurt. You thought there was a genuine significance to your relationship. You thought that your mutual respect would shield your relationship from the kinds of decisions that cause people to fall apart. However, something inside of you starts to shift when that trust is betrayed. You begin to see that sharing your suffering with someone who has already betrayed your trust won't make things right. You are aware that loyalty cannot endure in an environment where it is not valued. And gradually you start doing something they didn't anticipate. You give up trying. The lengthy discussions end. You no longer have the same level of patience. You no longer have the same level of emotional energy that you used to give them. They might not notice at first. For them, life goes on. Days pass. Their time is occupied by distractions. However, there is an odd power to silence. It gradually makes room where you used to be. And that space eventually becomes apparent. There is no longer the understanding individual standing next to them. The person who helped them through tough times has quietly moved on. And unknowingly, the first lesson has already been taught by life. Because the absence that results from someone betraying the trust of someone who genuinely cared about them frequently speaks louder than words could. 2. When life begins to reveal what they have lost. They initially perceive life as normal. The days keep passing by. They occupy their time with work, talks, and other everyday distractions. Nothing appears to be unusual at first glance. However, when someone isn't ready for it, life has a subtle way of bringing back particular thoughts. It could start with anything minor. A location that brings back memories of a conversation you previously had. A location that brings back memories of a conversation you previously had. When they suddenly discover that the individual who used to genuinely listen to them is no longer there. Or a circumstance in which they anticipate receiving the same level of patience from you. However, find out that not everyone reacts with the same comprehension. At first, these times appear straightforward. However, they gradually begin to disclose something more profound. Because people frequently don't realize what they've lost when they betray the confidence of someone who genuinely cared about them. They don't realize it right away. Later, when interpersonal talks seem a bit more detached. Later, when other people's support no longer seems as sincere as it once did. Later, when they come to understand that individuals don't always provide allegiance as readily as they formerly thought. At that point, memories of you start to surface more frequently. They begin to recall how you handled them. The tolerance you displayed during their trying times. The work you did to maintain the relationship. Even when things got complicated, you made an effort to grasp them. Those things seemed typical back then. They start to feel uncommon now. The second lesson is gradually being revealed by life. Because the person who betrayed your trust begins to notice something they were previously unaware of. It was unusual how much you cared for them. Many people look for it, but they don't always find it. And realizing that after it's already gone produces an emotion that gets more difficult to ignore with time. A silent insight that starts to develop within them. The knowledge that betraying your trust might have cost them much more than they anticipated. 3. When it is impossible to disregard the lesson. The memories merely make them reflective at first. They recall time spent with you. They observe the contrast between the current state of affairs and the previous state. However, such thoughts eventually cease to be merely recollections. They became a reality. Because something starts to become more apparent the more they look back. You weren't only a passing acquaintance. You were someone who genuinely had faith in them. You provided them with something that many others find difficult to provide. True allegiance. When others could have moved away, you stood next to them. Even when things got tough, you made an effort to keep the bond intact. And now, as they think back on the past, they begin to notice something they used to overlook. You truly trusted them. They also broke it. They didn't anticipate feeling the weight of that realization. Because life starts imparting a lesson that is difficult to avoid when someone realizes the extent of the trust they betrayed. They begin to realize how uncommon that level of trust is. Not everyone has the same faith in them as you did. Not everyone is as understanding or patient. And gradually, they start to confront an unsettling reality. They are no longer accompanied by the individual who once had complete faith in them. You weren't angry when you left. You left because you underwent a significant internal transformation. You came to the realization that you should never trust someone who is irresponsible. And as that comprehension deepens, something else starts to take shape within them. I apologize. Not the loud kind of regret that everyone can see, but the silent kind that shows up in the middle of the night when their thoughts stray to the past. When they see that you no longer have the same level of authenticity in your talks. Or when they come to the realization that wishing things were different won't be enough to restore the trust they betrayed. At that point, the lesson life is imparting to them starts to feel authentic. Because betraying someone's trust doesn't always have instant repercussions. However, when such repercussions do eventually materialize, they frequently take the shape of something unexpected. The knowledge that they might never be trusted again by the person they have harmed. 4. When they consider repairing the damage they caused. When enough time goes by, regret starts to become stronger. The wish to alter the past. Because an idea gradually emerges in someone's head after they fully comprehend the trust they betrayed. Perhaps I ought to speak with them once more. It seems easy at first. Just a message. Just a little effort to get back in touch. They speculate that perhaps things have gotten better over time. Perhaps enough time has elapsed for things to revert to their previous state. However, something stops them as soon as they give reaching out some serious thought. A silent insight. Because getting in touch with you now requires acknowledging the reality of what transpired. It entails admitting that they damaged something worthwhile. the confidence you previously freely bestowed onto them. And a second question starts to form in the back of their minds. What if things have changed? Because time is more than just passing. People are altered by it. The version of yourself that attempted to keep the relationship intact. The version of yourself that repeatedly described your emotions. The version of yourself that endured pain without losing patience. You might not be the same person you were then. You learned something significant, not because your heart grew chilly. You discovered that one of the most brittle things a person can offer is trust. Additionally, if something is broken, it can never fully recover. They hesitate after realizing that. Because they start to comprehend what life is gradually teaching them. The individual who formerly had unwavering faith in them has now learned to guard their heart. And all of a sudden, mending everything turns out to be more difficult than they anticipated. Because they can no longer be certain that the door they once closed will open again, even if they reach out. At that point, the lesson starts to feel more demanding. Their betrayal of trust wasn't an isolated incident. It was a moment that permanently altered the relationship's future. 5. The lesson life silently imparts. Ultimately, they learn a quiet lesson from life. It's very intimate. Because there comes a time when they finally understand everything. Not in the middle of a dispute. Not in a major altercation. But in a quiet moment when they honestly reflect on the past. They start to notice things they had previously disregarded. How you have faith in them. The manner in which you trusted your relationship. The way you remained devoted even when things were difficult. All of a sudden, they comprehend something that was before thought to be invisible. You provided them with something genuine. People don't give this kind of trust carelessly. You trusted that they would guard your heart in the same manner that you guarded theirs. However, they broke it instead. And once they completely accept that reality, they are unable to resist the lesson life is giving them. Because they come to an unpleasant realization. The one who once had complete faith in them. The patience and loyalty of the person who previously stood by them has vanished. You didn't just vanish. You just made a modification. You discovered that trust is too precious to continue providing to someone who abuses it. You discovered that preserving your tranquility is more important than clinging to someone who failed to keep your heart safe. And you took a hesitant step forward. Not in a rage. Not in retaliation. But with power. That's what a lot of people don't anticipate. Because they frequently learn the person who most trusted them has already left when life eventually delivers them the lesson about the trust they violated. And occasionally, that turns into the most challenging lesson of all. The knowledge that certain occurrences in life are irreversible. It's not that forgiveness is impossible, but rather that the trust that previously existed can never be fully restored. Thus, keep this in mind if you have ever been harmed by someone who betrayed your confidence. Life teaches things in its own unique way. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is to choose to keep your heart intact and walk on with dignity rather than attempt to mend what someone else decided to break. If this message resonated with you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and forward it to anyone who could be in need of this reminder right now. Because a single anecdote can occasionally aid someone in remembering something significant. It was never your trust that went wrong. It was only a lesson to give it to the incorrect person.